Caleb Hart had lived alone for so long that silence felt like his closest friend. His small ranch sat miles away from the nearest town, tucked between wide-open fields and distant blue mountains. Every morning, he woke before the sun, put on his worn boots, and walked out to the barn with a slow, steady rhythm. His life was simple, predictable, and quiet, so quiet that even the sound of wind brushing through the grass felt like company. He was not the kind of man who talked much. People in town often wondered about him, but they rarely asked questions. They called him the Lonesome Rider, a nickname that stuck because he spent most of his days riding across the open land with only his horse, Dusty, beside him. Caleb did not mind the name. If anything, it fit him. He didn't have a family waiting for him. No wife, no children, no relatives who wrote letters or called. As far as he knew, he had no one left in the world. Caleb did not choose this lonely life for the joy of solitude. It was simply the path he believed life had pushed him onto. Years ago, though he never talked about it, he had suffered an accident. During a rodeo show, the event was supposed to be a small celebration in town, something cheerful, something people attended for excitement and fun. Caleb had ridden in many shows before, but that day, something had gone wrong. He fell, hit his head, and everything became a blur. He remembered waking up in a hospital bed with a doctor gently explaining that he had suffered some memory loss. Not everything was gone. He still remembered how to talk, how to ride, how to live day to day, but pieces of his past were scattered and unclear. Names, faces, places, conversations, they slipped away from him like sand through open fingers. After the accident, he felt like a stranger in his own life. People told him stories about who he was, but their words felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Friends tried to visit, but the visits made him uncomfortable. He felt guilty for not remembering them, guilty for staring at them with blank eyes as they shared memories he could not reach. So little by little, he stopped trying to fit into his old life. He walked away, heading far into the countryside, where no one expected him to remember anything at all. And that was how he ended up on the ranch, alone, quiet, free from expectations, but also disconnected from the world. His days followed the same gentle pattern, and he liked it that way. He would feed the animals, mend fences, patch up old saddles, and ride Dusty out across the fields. The open land comforted him. The sky stretched so wide that it made his worries feel small. He found peace in watching cattle graze or listening to the distant calls of birds. Out here, nothing asked him to recall anything painful or confusing. Out here, the past did not bother him. But even though Caleb had taught himself to live quietly, loneliness still rested on him like an old coat he couldn't take off. Sometimes, at night, he would sit on his porch with a cup of coffee and stare at the stars. The ranch was so far from town that the sky was lit with thousands of tiny lights. The stars felt like little memories, perfect but unreachable. He often wondered what his life had been like before the accident. Had he been a cheerful man once? Had he laughed often? Had he loved someone? He could never be sure. Sometimes, when he dreamed, he saw flashes. A warm smile. A soft voice calling his name. The feeling of holding someone's hand. But whenever he tried to hold on to the dream, it faded by morning. He told himself those flashes were only imagination, nothing more. Caleb didn't own much. His home was modest, just a small kitchen, a bedroom with a single bed, and a living room with an old fireplace that cracked loudly during winter nights. On the walls, there were no photos, no paintings, no decorations. He did not have a past to hang up, and he had no future he expected to celebrate. Everything he owned had a purpose. Everything he did had a routine. Still, people in town held a gentle respect for him. When he came into the general store for supplies, the owner, Mr. Clarkson, always greeted him with a warm smile. "Morning, Caleb." Need the usual feed and rope again? Caleb would nod, tip his hat, and mumble a quiet, "Yes, sir." He never stayed long. Crowds made him uneasy, and conversations felt heavy, as if people expected him to reveal something he couldn't grasp. So he bought what he needed and headed home as quickly as he could. Despite his quietness, he wasn't unkind. Whenever a neighbor needed help fixing a fence or rounding up cattle, Caleb would show up without being asked. He didn't talk much during the work, but his presence made things easier. People trusted his calm nature, his steady hands, and his reliability. Even if he didn't talk about himself, his actions spoke of a man with a good heart. But when the work was done, he always returned to the ranch alone. Over the years, he convinced himself that he had never been married and probably never would be. The idea of having a wife or a family seemed too far away, too unreal for someone who couldn't even remember whole pieces of his past. Sometimes, he wondered if maybe he had once been in love. Perhaps he had held someone in his arms, promised them a future, whispered dreams under the stars. But that felt like a story that happened to someone else, someone whose memories were still whole. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Caleb sat on the porch, watching dusty grays in the distance. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with soft orange light. The moment was peaceful, but it carried a quiet ache he couldn't explain. He felt like something in his life was missing, a piece of his heart he had forgotten how to search for. He took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling off. "This is enough," he whispered to himself. "This life is enough." But even he didn't fully believe it. There were moments, small, unnoticed by anyone else, when his mind drifted into empty spaces, trying to fill the gaps. Sometimes he would pick up an old guitar in the corner of his living room, fingers moving clumsily over the strings. He didn't remember learning how to play, but the muscle memory was still there, faint and uncertain. The melody he played always felt incomplete, as if he had forgotten the ending. Other times, he felt a strange heaviness in his chest, a longing he couldn't name. He tried to ignore it, telling himself that some feelings had no explanation. But deep down, he sensed that the emptiness came from something real, something he had lost long ago. Still, he kept his life simple. He worked, he rode, he listened to the wind, and he waited for nothing. But life has a way of surprising even those who stop expecting surprises. On the surface, Caleb's world seemed calm and unchanging. But something was quietly moving toward him, something that would shake his quiet existence and challenge every belief he held about his past. And Caleb had no idea that soon, a single sentence from a stranger would turn his entire world upside down. A sentence he never imagined hearing. A sentence that would change everything he thought he knew about himself. Caleb woke early the next morning, the same way he did every day. The air was cool, the sky pale with the first signs of dawn. He stepped outside, stretched his tired shoulders, and walked toward the barn to start feeding the animals. Everything felt quiet and usual, the kind of morning that moved slowly and peacefully over the land. He did not know that this day would be different, very different. As he worked, Dusty lifted his head and looked toward the long dirt road that wound across the open fields. Caleb followed the horse's gaze, expecting maybe a delivery truck or a lost traveler. Instead, he saw something much stranger, a single car making its way toward the ranch. Cars rarely came out this far. Most people in town knew that Caleb preferred to keep to himself, and they respected that. Strangers almost never arrived without some kind of reason. Caleb frowned, brushing dirt off his hands as he stepped outside the barn for a clearer look. The car grew closer, kicking up dust as it rolled along the road. It was a small, silver sedan. Nothing fancy, but clearly out of place among the rough pastures and wooden fences. Caleb waited quietly, curiosity rising inside him. Something about this moment felt heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The car finally slowed to a stop near the front of the ranch. For a long second, no one got out. Caleb felt his heartbeat pick up a little. He didn't know why. He wasn't afraid, just unsettled, like the past he had tried so hard to forget was suddenly knocking on his door. Then the door opened. A woman stepped out. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, he wasn't good at guessing ages. She had gentle eyes, the kind that held both strength and sadness. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and she wore simple clothes, jeans, boots, and a soft blue shirt. She looked like someone who had traveled a long way. Someone who was tired, but determined. Caleb stood still, unsure of what to say or do. The woman seemed equally unsure for a moment. She took a few steps forward, paused, and took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Then she finally spoke. "Caleb?" His name came from her lips gently, as though she had spoken it 1,000 times before. Caleb stared at her, confused. He didn't recognize her voice, her face, or the way she looked at him with something more than curiosity, something closer to recognition. "Yes," he answered cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman swallowed hard. Her hands trembled a little. She lifted her eyes to his and said the words that would knock the quiet routine of his life off its feet. "I'm your wife." Silence fell over the ranch. A still, fragile silence that pressed against Caleb's chest. For a moment, he wondered if he had misheard her, but her expression told him he had heard correctly. She wasn't joking. She wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. But Caleb was. He took a step back, stunned. What?" She nodded slowly. "Your wife. My name is Emily Dawson. Or Emily Hart. I suppose that depends on how you see things." Her voice cracked slightly, but she stood tall, as if she had practiced this moment again and again, preparing for every possible reaction. Caleb felt his heart pound loudly in his ears. He searched his mind desperately, trying to find even the smallest memory of this woman. A face, a smile, a story, a moment, anything. But there was nothing. No sudden flash of recognition. No hidden memory springing back to life. Just emptiness. "I don't understand," he said quietly. I don't know you." Emily's eyes softened, not in disappointment but in a kind of gentle sadness, like she had expected this reaction. She stepped closer, but not too close, giving him space. "I know you don't remember," she said softly. "And I knew that before coming here. But I had to try. I had to see you. I've been looking for you for a long time." Caleb felt dizzy. His thoughts tangled themselves into knots. "Why would you think? How could I be your husband?" Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were papers and photographs, all carefully organized. She held out a marriage certificate, the edges worn from years of handling. Caleb stared at it, confused and troubled. His name was right there. Caleb Hart. Alongside hers, Emily Dawson Hart. The date was from 9 years ago. His breath caught in his throat. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "I've lived alone for years. I don't remember getting married. I don't remember being with you." Emily nodded, tears gathering in her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. "I know. After your accident, everything changed. You left. You left without a note, without a goodbye. I didn't understand why. I didn't know if something was wrong or if you were hurting. I searched everywhere, Caleb. I didn't stop. Not for a single year. I believed you didn't walk away because you wanted to. I believed something happened to you. I believed you were lost." The words struck something deep inside him, something he didn't have a name for. He wasn't sure if it was guilt, confusion, or fear. Maybe all of them together. He shook his head weakly. "I don't remember leaving. I don't remember you. I don't remember any of this." Emily looked at him with compassion, not anger. Your doctor said you might have memory gaps from the head injury. I prayed that someday, those memories would come back. But as time passed, I realized waiting wasn't enough. I had to find you. I had to know you were alive. She held out another photograph, a picture of them standing together, smiling under a string of tiny lights. Caleb stared at it. He saw himself in the image, younger and lighter somehow, with an arm around a woman he looked deeply comfortable with. His own face, in that photograph, told a story he couldn't read anymore. His throat tightened. I don't remember this, he whispered again. Emily's smile trembled. I know, but I do. Caleb felt overwhelmed. The world seemed to tilt around him, the familiar ranch suddenly strange. He turned away for a moment, trying to steady his breath. Everything he believed about his life, every assumption he had built his quiet routine on was shaking apart. Emily didn't push him. She stayed still, waiting, giving him time. After a long silence, Caleb slowly faced her again. He saw the tiredness in her eyes, the hope, the longing, and something else. Patience. A deep, warm patience that made him feel both comforted and unsure. Why come now? He asked softly. After all these years? Emily took a step closer, voice steady. Because I finally found you. And I needed to know if you're still the man I loved, or if there's nothing left of him in you now. No. Caleb didn't know what to say. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel, either. But something inside him whispered that this woman, this stranger, claiming to be his wife, was telling the truth. Not because of the papers or the pictures, but because of the emotion in her eyes. That kind of emotion didn't grow overnight. It didn't come from imagination. It came from years of love, loss, and searching. He felt a strange pull toward her. Not a memory, but a warmth he couldn't explain. Emily looked around at the ranch quietly. Can we talk inside? Or, maybe, somewhere you feel comfortable? Caleb hesitated, then slowly nodded. He didn't know her, but something in him trusted her presence. Or maybe he trusted the truth she carried, even if he didn't remember it. He gestured toward the small porch. We can sit there. Emily smiled softly, grateful. Thank you. As they walked together, awkward, uncertain, but moving in the same direction, the quiet wind brushed through the grass, as if the land itself sensed the shift in his life. Caleb had spent years believing he was alone. But now, a woman who claimed to be his wife had stepped into his world, carrying the missing pieces of a past he had never expected to find. And the hardest truth was still ahead. This was only the beginning of the answers she had come to give him. The beginning of a story he didn't remember living. Caleb sat at his small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of warm coffee, though he wasn't drinking it. Across from him sat the woman who claimed to be his wife, Emily. Her name felt soft, familiar, yet distant, like a song he had once heard but couldn't hum anymore. The room was quiet except for the sound of Dusty brushing his hooves against the ground outside. Caleb kept his eyes down, staring at the coffee, unsure of what to say. Emily sat still, giving him the space he needed. She didn't push him to talk. Instead, she looked around the simple kitchen, her eyes landing on the old guitar in the corner, the faded curtains, the well-used boots near the door. Everything in the house told a story of a man who lived simply and alone. Finally, Caleb lifted his head. You really think we were married? Emily's eyes softened. I don't think it, Caleb. I know it. She reached into her bag and gently pulled out a small envelope. Her fingers trembled only slightly, but Caleb noticed. She slid the envelope toward him, giving him time to open it when he felt ready. Inside were photographs, old, slightly curled at the edges, but clear enough to see. Caleb picked the first one up. His breath caught. It was him, younger, smiling, standing in front of a little white house with a wooden porch. And next to him was Emily, her arm wrapped around his, both of them looking happy, in a way he couldn't remember ever feeling. He stared at the picture for a long moment. That's me. Yes, Emily whispered. That was us. He looked at the next photo. They were sitting on a blanket in an open field. He was leaning back on his elbows while Emily rested her head on his shoulder. The sunlight touched their faces gently, like even the world around them was in love with their happiness. Caleb swallowed, unsure how to take in these images of a life he couldn't recall. About 10 years ago, she answered, before everything changed. Caleb's voice was unsteady. Before the accident. Emily nodded. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. I don't remember any of this. I know, she said softly. And that's okay. I'm not here to force memories back. I just want you to know the truth. She reached into the envelope again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. When she opened it, Caleb saw it was an official document. Their marriage certificate. His name. Her name. A date. A signature he recognized as his own but felt as though it belonged to someone else. He stared at it for a long time before placing it gently on the table. I don't understand, he admitted. If we were married, why didn't you find me sooner? Why didn't you tell me before now? Emily looked down at her hands. I tried, Caleb. I truly did. She breathed deeply, gathering herself before continuing. After your accident, everything changed at once. They told me you had lost some of your memory, but no one realized how much. When I came to the hospital, you didn't know who I was. You looked at me like I was a stranger, and I could see how frightened you were. Caleb listened silently, his heart heavy. You stayed for a little while, she said, but you grew distant. The doctors told me it might take time, that memories could return slowly. So I waited. I stayed by your side, every day. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. She was calm, steady, like someone who had learned to carry pain quietly. But one morning, she went on. I came to visit you, and you were gone. You had checked yourself out early, before sunrise. You didn't leave a note. No one knew where you went. Caleb's eyebrows pulled together. I left? You did, she said. Caleb tried to imagine himself walking away from a hospital room without a word. It didn't feel like something he would do, but then again, he couldn't trust his memories. He didn't know what kind of man he had been back then. I searched everywhere, Emily continued. Your friends helped. Your family tried to reach out, but you didn't return calls, and your old home was empty. We filed missing person reports, asked around towns, checked hospitals, but there was no trace. 18. Caleb felt a tightness in his chest. I'm sorry. Emily gave a small smile, gentle and sincere. You don't have to apologize, Caleb. You weren't yourself. You were confused, scared, and hurting. I just wish I could have found you sooner. He looked away, his voice quiet. I didn't know. I had someone to return to. I know, she said sadly. That's why I'm here. She explained how over the years she kept searching. Whenever someone mentioned a cowboy who lived out on his own, she followed the rumor. Whenever she heard of a man with a quiet nature and lost memories, she traveled to that town. She had spent nearly 9 years wandering from place to place, hoping to find him. Then, a few months ago, she came across an invoice at a ranch supply store in a nearby town. It had Caleb's name on it. She asked questions, followed the trail, and eventually found his ranch. I didn't want to scare you, she said softly. I knew showing up unannounced would be overwhelming, but I had no other choice. I couldn't keep living my life, wondering if the man I loved was alive, or if he needed help, or if he had simply forgotten me, forever. Caleb's throat felt dry. The love and patience in her words pressed against the walls he had built around his heart. He looked down at the photographs again. In the images, he wasn't the lonely, quiet man he knew today. He looked lighter, happier, full of warmth. He didn't understand how a man who looked so full of life could change so completely. Emily watched him gently, giving him time to process. Caleb. We were good together. We had big dreams. We talked about building a family, raising horses, traveling a little. We had plans. And then, everything stopped. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, trying to picture a version of himself who dreamed of a future. The man in the photos felt like a stranger, someone he admired but didn't know. Why didn't my memories come back? He asked quietly. No one could say, Emily explained. The doctors said memory loss is strange. Some people recover slowly. Some recover suddenly. Some don't recover everything. But they told me your condition wasn't hopeless. There was always a chance your memory could return with time. Caleb opened his eyes. It never did. Maybe, she said gently. It still can. He wasn't sure whether that comforted him or scared him. The idea that he had lived a whole life he couldn't remember, loved someone deeply, made promises, shared dreams, it felt overwhelming. It felt like he was discovering a book he had written but never read. Emily, he began, choosing his words carefully. I don't want to pretend I remember something I don't. I don't want to hurt you. She looked at him with the same calm strength she had shown from the moment she arrived. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to let me tell you our story. Let me help you understand who we were. You don't have to feel anything right away. You just have to listen. Caleb nodded slowly. The truth was, he wanted to know. Even if remembering was painful or confusing, he wanted to understand the pieces of himself he had lost. So Emily began to tell him everything. She talked about the small diner where they first met, how he used to come in for coffee after work. She told him how she noticed that he always left extra tip money, even when he didn't talk much. She told him how he finally gathered the courage to ask her out, and how their first date had been simple, a walk by the river, where he talked about horses and she talked about books. She told him how he made her laugh with his quiet jokes, and how he always held doors open for her. How he worked hard, saved money, and talked about making something of his own. How he proposed to her under a tree decorated with tiny lights they hung together. Caleb listened carefully, trying to imagine himself in each memory. Sometimes, he felt a flicker, like a tiny spark inside him, but it vanished too quickly to hold on to. Emily continued, describing their early marriage. The home they shared, the dreams they planted together, and the life they were building. And then she told him about the day of the accident. Her voice softened. You were trying to help someone, Caleb. You weren't showing off. You weren't being careless. You were doing something kind. And then everything changed. He didn't ask for details. He didn't want to relive something painful. She didn't push it, either. When she finished speaking, the room felt heavy with all the years that had passed between them. Caleb leaned back, sighing. It feels unreal, he admitted. Like I'm hearing someone else's story. I know, she said, but it's our story. He met her eyes. There was hope in them, soft, patient hope. I don't expect you to remember everything today, she said. Or tomorrow. Or even next year. I just want you to know that I'm here. And I never stopped believing that one day, I'd find you. Caleb sat quietly, absorbing her words. For the first time in many years, his loneliness didn't feel like a permanent shadow. For the first time, someone had stepped into his quiet world, not asking him to be more, but simply asking him to listen. And even though he did not remember the life he had once lived, he felt something inside him shifting slowly, gently, like a door opening after being closed for too long. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if memories would return, or if they would stay lost, forever. But he did know one thing. He wasn't as alone as he thought. The days that followed were unlike anything Caleb had experienced in many years. His quiet ranch, once filled only with the soft sounds of wind and animals, now carried the presence of another heartbeat, Emily's. She moved gently through the place, never rushing, never raising her voice, and always giving Caleb space to breathe. Even so, her presence stirred something deep inside him, something both familiar and strange. Caleb tried to understand his own feelings. But it wasn't easy. For years, he had accepted loneliness like a permanent companion, a part of life he thought he could never walk away from. And now, suddenly, there was a woman saying she was his wife, someone who carried memories he couldn't reach, someone who looked at him with a mixture of love, hope, and sadness. It made him feel like he was living inside a story he didn't fully remember. On the second morning after Emily arrived, Caleb woke early, as he always did. The sun had barely touched the sky. He stepped outside to start feeding the animals, only to find Emily already awake, sitting on the porch with a warm cup of tea between her hands. She looked up and smiled softly. "You always rise with the sun," she said gently. "You used to do that before too." Caleb paused, his breath catching for a moment. He didn't remember that part of himself, yet hearing it from her felt strangely comforting. "Old habits, I guess," he replied. Emily didn't correct him. She simply nodded and held her tea a little closer, as if she was cherishing a small piece of the past returning to life. Over the next few days, Caleb and Emily shared more quiet moments. Emily helped him with simple chores, collecting eggs, watering the small vegetable patch behind the house, brushing Dusty's coat until it shone. She always worked calmly, as if she belonged there. At first, Caleb didn't know what to think. Watching her move around the ranch felt both natural and surprising, like remembering a song he had forgotten long ago. One afternoon, while repairing a loose board on the fence, Caleb stole a glance at her. She stood nearby, holding the extra nails for him, her hair lightly blowing in the wind. Something about that moment touched him deeply. He didn't know why his heart tightened, but it did. Perhaps it was the way she looked at him, not with expectation or pressure, but with gentle hope. Still, confusion lingered inside him. Every time he tried to force himself to remember something concrete, where they lived, what she wore on their wedding day, how they met, his mind felt like it was reaching into fog. That fog had been with him for so long that it almost felt normal. Now, with Emily standing in front of him, he wished with all his heart that he could lift it. When evening came, they sat on the porch together. The sky turned into soft shades of purple and pink, the mountains in the distance glowing under the last light of day. Emily wrapped her hands around a warm cup of tea, while Caleb rested his on his lap. The silence between them felt gentle, not heavy. Finally, Caleb spoke. "I want to remember," he said slowly, "but every time I try, it feels far away, like I'm trying to catch smoke." Emily turned to him, her eyes softening. "I know. I never came here to force you. I only wanted to see you, to know you were safe. Whatever happens after that, I'll accept it." Her words felt like a soft blanket around his heart. He let out a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Tell me about us," he said quietly. "If you want to." Emily smiled, though her eyes shimmered with emotion. She placed her cup down and began to speak. She told him about the small town where they met, the bakery where she worked, the shy smile he gave her the first time he bought a loaf of bread, the way she teased him for always choosing the same kind. She described the evenings they spent walking under streetlights, sharing stories, laughing softly at nothing important. She spoke of how he always spoke kindly, how he checked on elderly neighbors, how he loved animals with a gentle heart. As she spoke, Caleb felt a strange warmth inside him. He couldn't remember any of the scenes she described, but they felt true. Something in his heart responded to the stories like an echo, faint, distant, but real. Emily continued. She told him about the day he proposed under a cottonwood tree, the simple ceremony they had, and the promises they whispered to each other. She spoke of how he used to hum while fixing things around the house, how they dreamed of opening a small ranch one day. Her voice trembled slightly when she talked about the accident, how everything changed afterward, how he became a stranger, even to himself. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. He wanted to reach for those memories, to see them clearly. But all he saw were shadows. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" Emily asked gently. "For forgetting you." Emily shook her head softly. "You didn't choose to forget. Life happened to you. I never blamed you." He looked down at his hands. They were strong, rough, shaped by years of work, but they also felt empty, as if something had once rested in them that he could not now hold. Later that night, long after Emily had gone inside, Caleb stayed on the porch. The stars shone above him, bright and clear. He stared at them, thinking about everything he had learned, everything he couldn't remember, and everything he suddenly wished he could feel again. He realized something important then. Remembering wasn't just about the mind, it was about the heart. And his heart, though slow and quiet, was waking up. The next day, he invited Emily to ride with him. It was something he hadn't done with anyone in years. Emily accepted softly, and the way she looked, climbing onto Dusty, told him that the moment meant more than words could express. As they rode across the fields, the wind brushing past them, Caleb felt something inside him shift. Emily looked peaceful, her eyes shining with quiet joy. The sight made something stir deep in his chest, a warmth that felt almost like a memory. He didn't understand it fully, but he welcomed it. They stopped near a small pond, where wildflowers grew along the edge. Emily stepped down from the horse and picked one of the blooms gently. She handed it to Caleb. "You used to bring me flowers," she said with a shy smile. "Every Sunday after church." Caleb held the flower carefully. It was small and delicate, but for him, it felt like holding a piece of his past. "Maybe I can try again," he said softly. Emily's breath caught. She didn't speak. In the days that followed, Caleb made an effort to open himself to the truth, to their truth. He walked with Emily around the ranch, asked her more questions, listened to her stories, and allowed himself to imagine the life she described. He didn't force memories. Instead, he let them come naturally, like gentle waves. Sometimes, a small detail would spark something. A familiar scent. A word she said. The touch of her hand brushing against his. The memories were not complete, but they were real enough to give him hope. One evening, while watching the sunset again, Caleb spoke softly. "Maybe we can build something new," he said. "Something honest. Something from who I am now." Emily's eyes filled with warmth. "I would love that," she whispered. And in that simple moment, Caleb realized that even if his past was foggy, his future didn't have to be. He had a choice to keep walking alone, or to take a step towards something meaningful. And with Emily beside him, he felt brave enough to take that step. Caleb stood on the porch the morning after Emily arrived, watching the soft light of dawn spread across the land. Something inside him felt different, as if the world had quietly shifted during the night. He had barely slept, not because of fear, but because his mind kept returning to the gentle way Emily spoke, the softness in her eyes, and the patient hope in her voice. It had been a long time since he had felt any kind of closeness to another human being, and it unsettled him both in a comforting and confusing way. Inside the small house, Emily prepared a simple breakfast. She moved around the kitchen as if she had been there before, though she was careful not to assume too much. She placed 2 plates on the table and stepped back, unsure if she had the right to sit as she once did. Caleb walked in slowly, almost shyly, and gave her a nod of thanks before taking a seat. They ate quietly for a few minutes, neither one wanting to chase away the fragile peace that had settled between them. After breakfast, Caleb suggested a walk around the ranch. Emily agreed, and they stepped outside together. The air was fresh, carrying the soft scent of morning grass and distant pine. Caleb pointed out the old barn, the corral, and the open fields where he spent most of his days riding. Emily listened with interest, her eyes following the direction of his hand, as if trying to picture how he had lived for all those years without her. They walked slowly, giving Caleb time to think. With each step, small pieces of his past drifted back, nothing complete, but enough to stir emotions he had forgotten he could feel. A quiet familiarity settled between them, not because he remembered everything, but because his heart recognized something his mind still struggled to reach. At one point, they stopped near a wooden fence, where the land opened wide into a golden field. Emily rested her hands on the rail, and Caleb stood a little distance away, unsure if he should move closer. She turned toward him with a gentle smile. "You don't have to remember everything today," she said softly. "I'm not here to pressure you. I only want us to try, if you want that too." Her voice floated in the air like a warm breeze, settling gently into his thoughts. Caleb took a slow breath and nodded, feeling a small ache in his chest. "I want to try," he admitted. "I don't want to keep running from things I don't understand." Emily's eyes softened with relief. For the first time since she arrived, she let herself hope freely, without fear of hurting him or pushing him away. Over the next few days, they spent more time together. They talked not about the lost years, but about simple things. They shared meals, rode horses along the fence lines, and watched sunsets from the porch. Caleb found that he liked hearing Emily's laughter, a sound that felt strangely familiar, as if he had once heard it many times in another life. She told him stories about her work, about small things she liked, and about the quiet strength she found while searching for him all those years. Caleb listened carefully, admiring her patience. He had always imagined himself as someone who caused burdens, someone who brought trouble without meaning to. But Emily's presence made him feel different. She never rushed him, never expected him to be the man he once was. She simply met him where he stood, giving him space to learn who he had been and who he wanted to become. One afternoon, while they sat near the barn, Caleb surprised himself by asking, "What was I like before everything?" Emily paused, her expression thoughtful. She didn't answer quickly, wanting to choose her words with care. "You were calm," she said finally. "Gentle. You believed in kindness even when life wasn't easy. You used to sing when you worked around the ranch. And you loved deeply. Not loudly, but with every part of your heart." Caleb swallowed hard, touched by the picture she painted. He wondered how such a man had slipped away from himself. The accident had not just taken memories, it had taken pieces of who he was. Later that evening, they looked through the small box Emily had brought with her, the one filled with photos and letters. Caleb sat down at the table, feeling nervous, but ready. Emily placed the photos gently before him. In some of them, he saw himself smiling, standing close to her, holding her hand. In one picture, they were sitting under a tree, laughing at something the camera had not captured. As he studied the images, something warm bloomed in his chest, like a soft ember, slowly growing into a flame. He still did not remember every moment, but he recognized the emotion in his own expression. The man in the photos looked happy, content, loved. Caleb felt a gentle pull inside him, like a whisper saying, "This was real. This mattered." In the days that followed, Caleb began therapy sessions with someone from the nearby town. Emily drove him to his appointments, waiting patiently in the lobby while he talked through his memories, fears, and hopes. Healing wasn't fast, but Caleb felt lighter each time he left a session. He started to understand that remembering everything wasn't the only goal. Building something new mattered just as much. Emily never told him how to feel. She let him take the lead, trusting that he would find his way in his own time. Her patience became a steady light in his life, guiding him gently forward. One evening, near the end of her stay at the ranch, they sat on the porch watching the stars. Caleb felt a peaceful warmth beside her, a sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. He turned toward her slowly. "I don't remember everything," he said quietly, "but I remember enough to know. I don't want to lose you again." Emily's breath caught in her throat, and her eyes shimmered with quiet emotion. "You don't have to be who you were before," she whispered. "We can start new. We can build something together." Step by step, Caleb reached out hesitantly, taking her hand. The moment felt both new and familiar, like stepping into a memory and a dream at the same time. Her hand fit into his, as if it had always belonged there. In that simple gesture, the loneliness he had carried for years began to fade. Not disappear entirely, but soften like a storm, finally calming after a long, restless night. A few weeks later, they visited their old home, a small white house with a porch covered in vines. It felt strange for Caleb to step inside a place he didn't fully remember, but Emily walked beside him, guiding him gently. The rooms held traces of a life he once lived. A bookshelf filled with old novels, a wooden table they once shared meals at, and a bedroom with soft curtains fluttering in the afternoon breeze. Caleb touched the walls, the furniture, the memories woven into every corner. He didn't remember everything, but he felt something warm, something hopeful. "We'll take it slow," Emily told him. "We can fix the house together. We can make new memories to fill the spaces that feel empty." Caleb nodded, a soft smile forming on his lips. For the first time in years, he felt like he was stepping toward something, not away from it. They returned to the ranch with a shared plan: to rebuild their life, one small piece at a time. The days that followed were gentle, filled with quiet moments and new beginnings. Caleb no longer saw himself as the lonely cowboy. He was a man rediscovering love, rediscovering hope, rediscovering himself. And as long as Emily walked beside him, he knew he would never walk alone again.